welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be sharing a real-time video which shows the process of me doing one of my larger A3 paintings. So I haven't done one of these kind of videos with a voiceover and showing the real-time footage in quite a while here on YouTube, but I do these quite often on my Patreon. So if this is the kind of video that you enjoy watching and want to know more about my process, and I try and share 3 videos a month over there on Patreon. So on the Sketch Club reward tier I have the main exclusive video, but I always try and share some bonus ones as well. And over the last few months I've been sharing more about how I'm painting and my process behind each piece. But for this one I wanted to share it on YouTube, and I'm really pleased I recorded this one. I think the result is really interesting because I did use quite a few new techniques and it was a very tactile painting, and I'm really pleased with how the end result came out. So you can see here that I just taped it to the wall, and this is just a piece of A3 paper, and I prepped the background with a pink acrylic base, and that was mixed with some red acrylic and just some normal house paint. And you can also see I'm just using a standard house paint sort of brush, which obviously is usually used for walls, but I like to use it because it obviously gets the paint down quickly, but it also creates a really nice texture, which is mostly what I'm after when I'm creating these bigger paintings. So you could see in the sky there I was really focusing on texture and using the width of the brush to create the swooping clouds. And I'm just blocking in the colours here, so this is like the base layer on top of the pink base layer. So this is like where I try and map out all the shapes, and this always ends up getting covered almost with all the details, although for the larger ones I definitely find I add on a bit less details simply because I feel like it hides a lot of the texture. So again, I've just mixed up some colours with the white house paint, and I'm just using De La Rowney acrylics. I think it's a mix of System 3 acrylics and some graduate acrylics, and I just mix those up on like paint tub lids and old Tupperware containers, takeaway containers, because I find that it's a really good way to store lots of acrylic paint when I've mixed it up, especially greens. So I tend to store it in a Tupperware container and pop the lid on, and then I can come back to the green when I next do my bigger painting. So here I'm creating some more texture with a technique I've never used before, and that's where I'm scraping some lines and marks into the paint whilst it's still wet. So with the circles there on the right, you can see it was a little bit too, like the paint had dried a bit too much, so it didn't work. But below it and on the left with the squiggly marks worked really nicely, and I was just using a pencil to create those marks. And because I've done the pink underpainting, like the base layer, it really works well because it has that extra dimension, and that's definitely something I want to do more of. So now I'm putting in the green layer, so there was some like grassy verges on the right, and this painting is referenced from a photo which I took when I visited this beach. So that's what I'm using as the reference, but I do add in a lighthouse at the end which wasn't in the reference. I just felt like the painting needed something else. So you can see here I'm using the greens. There's my Tupperware container that I use to store it in, and I just mix up different shades of greens in here. So obviously I started with the first one, and then I added a bit more blue to create the darker greens here. And I'm using a smaller brush here, so this is an actual artist paintbrush, but it's not very good quality. I don't tend to use super high quality brushes just because I'm really loading up with a lot of thick paint, and my main aim is just to get some of that down, and I'm not really thinking about like the quality of the brush. I really love the really thick marks that this one creates. And I do move on to smaller brushes, so I tend to start big and then I work my way down, especially as I add on more details. So for this one I'm just adding on an even darker green to add more shading onto the trees which are in the distance. And here I think I used gouache for this one because I don't have a black acrylic paint, and I just find I can create a bit more colour range when I use gouache. And I don't have a problem with mixing medias like this. I tend to just work with what feels right for me. So unless I'm doing a full acrylic piece, I tend to add on like gouache details for my larger paintings like this. One of the things that I have to change when I'm working big is that I need to allow for time to dry. So I don't tend to do many big paintings simply because I work quite fast as an artist. A lot of my gouache paintings are very quick, especially for my daily art challenge. I generally do them in a couple of hours, and obviously the quicker ones I try to keep at half an hour. But for these larger pieces I need to factor in the drying time because acrylics take a lot longer to dry than gouache. So when I get to this stage I'm really eager to get the painting done, which is why I tend to move to gouache. So here I'm adding on some texture on the left, and it's not a really nice colour. It didn't come out how I wanted, so you'll see I've got a little tissue in my hand that I'm just using to wipe away. And again, that's a technique I haven't used before, but I really wanted to try new ideas with this one, and I really like the idea of like adding and taking away, and I think it works better at a bigger scale. So that's what I was doing there, and it creates a really nice texture. So another thing I'm doing on this painting that I don't usually do is really using my hands, and I'm smudging the paint and really getting my fingers in there to move the paint around. Usually I'm quite a clean painter. I tend to only use my paintbrushes. Like the biggest mess I make is usually when I lean over and get it on my sleeve. So for this one it just felt really different to my usual paintings simply because I was using my hands more, and I think that's one of the reasons why this painting feels quite special for me. So again, I've moved down to a smaller brush here, and I just wanted to add on some like floral details. The verge, this grassy bank, was filled with little daisies, and I'm just using thick, I think that was acrylic paint for those white dots. And then I want to make it clear that this is a beach scene, so I'm adding on the sea here, and you'll see again I'm putting paint on and then I'm wiping it away with my fingers, and then I use a tissue, and I just really love the texture that makes. It's definitely a new way of working for me, but it's something I want to continue using and keep exploring as I create more and more of these larger pieces. Because I'm using gouache at this stage and it's laid on top of an acrylic base layer, it wipes off really nicely, whereas if you were using gouache on top of gouache, you'd have to be careful that when you're wiping it away it's not taking off the gouache underneath. And that's one of the reasons why I always do an acrylic underpainting rather than a gouache underpainting. So now's my favourite part, and I'm coming in with my Neocolor pastels. I tend to generally only use Neocolors for the details on these larger pieces, rather than when I'm working smaller and I use a lot of coloured pencil details. And that's mostly because I'm working on the wall, which is quite textured behind the paper, and I can't get like the level of detail I want. But I also find it easier to like fill the paper quicker because obviously the Neocolors are really pigmented and they just glide really nicely and smoothly over the acrylic paint. You can see like it does give a texture as well, which I really like, and also the Neocolors are really vibrant, and I use the Neocolor 2 pastels. So I'm doing that here in the sky, adding some squibbly marks. And again, I'm coming in with my paintbrush in a minute to sort of water that down. And I can do that because they are the Neocolor 2 pastels, which are water soluble. So this was a really different process again for me up in the sky. I definitely overworked this section here on the right where you can see I'm working on now. And I keep adding more and more, like slightly different shades of Neocolors and different blues and greys to really add depth and like a moodiness to the sky. And again, I'm using water to push that back, and I'm also adding drips here, which isn't something I've done before, but was really fun to do, and I'm really enjoying like trying new things and seeing how it works in my larger paintings, because I don't feel I can be as playful in my smaller sketchbook work. So this sky is really influenced by some of the work I had been doing in my sketchbook, and I mentioned in my Instagram caption when I posted this how interesting it is to me that my sketchbook work really influences some of these larger paintings, sometimes even more so than the other larger paintings I do. And this one was definitely inspired by the 2 stormy pieces that I've done recently, which I'll pop on the screen. And those were really interesting to me because I usually, in most of my paintings, I do the classic blue sky, and for some reason I'd never really thought to try different things, and the first piece was inspired by a storm. A lot of my daily art paintings are inspired by things that are happening, and we had a storm that night, and I really wanted to try and get that down on paper. And then the other one was another storm, but this time it was influenced by the first one, but I really wanted to try and capture the atmosphere. So that one's a lot more detailed and quite messy and busy, but I think it really holds a lot of energy. So I wanted to pare that back in this one. Obviously I didn't want it to be super stormy because the main focus is in the landscape rather than the sky. But I did want it to feel like a proper English summer, so I really wanted to focus on the clouds. And I think it really worked. I really like the movement that I captured up there. So when I'd finished all the painting, I really didn't know what to add on next because it really didn't feel finished to me, and I knew it needed something else. But when I was looking at the photo reference, like I'd done everything that I needed to. I had the boardwalk in there that draws your eye through the middle of the picture, and then the grassy verge and the clouds. So I didn't want to add in anything that was too distracting, but it definitely needed something. So I used collage for these, and I added in this White House and the little lighthouse. The good thing with collage is you can try it out and see if you like it. So the first lighthouse I did was actually the classic red stripy one. And to me that took too much away from the rest of the painting, so in the end I just went with the white one, and I just think that finishes it off really nicely. I'm really pleased with that decision. To try it out I did use blue tack first, but then once I'd made my decision of which lighthouse to use and like where to place it, I just glued that on. And because I had so much fun with that collage, I also created some more texture along the front, because again it didn't feel quite finished there, it felt like it was missing something. So I just created these little circles which are like pebbles, and I think that sits really nicely next to the scratched in effect. And these are just cut from my paint palette sheets, which I use for all of my collage pieces whenever I add them to my paintings, and I don't throw those away. That's just how I mix my paint, and then I keep those and cut into them, and it automatically creates a really nice texture. So here's some close-ups for the final piece. I actually have this one for sale on my shop if you wanted to buy the original. I'm not going to be making prints of this one because I want the original to be really special and like one of a kind, and I'm really proud of how this one turned out. I'm really pleased with the texture, and I'm definitely glad I filmed the process because I feel like you can't get a lot of these details across in just a photo on Instagram, so I'm really pleased you could see everything that went into this larger piece. I hope you enjoyed watching this one and that you have a lovely week. I'll see you next Sunday with a new video. See you later.